Here we go. Welcome back. In this show, I do like short 15-minute interviews with people about futurology and the internet and where they think things are going. And this is my friend Wes, who is
Hi.
graduating Stanford soon.
Yep.
So I wanted to make sure that I got a second with him before the very end.
This is literally the last thing I'll do at Stanford. Like, I'm going home after this, and then I'm flying home tomorrow. So
Oh, we're good.
yeah. Actually, I said tomorrow. It's not even tomorrow, but I'm not going to come back after I leave today. I'm flying out on Monday, and I'm going back home to Connecticut.
Nice. So last thing at Stanford.
Yeah.
Kind of looking back, I guess, we've shared a lot of thoughts around just being here for a while and really stewing in it,
Yeah.
Appreciating it, having your perspective change on why this thing exists and why we all choose to do it.
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing is like, how do you think that your like interpersonal, just sort of the ways that you meet people and get to know them and bring them closer, how do you feel like that's changed over your many years here?
Well, I guess I'd start with, I think, the freshman to senior culture is very different at Stanford and probably at every school, where as freshmen everyone's so open to meeting people, and it's the assumption is when you meet someone that they're going to be ready to have like a 30-minute conversation with you. Especially, this is my freshman dorm, that's why we're here.
Oh yeah, Wes painted this also.
Yeah, I'm in Sally Ride, and we renamed the dorm from Sarah to Sally Ride, and then I made this mural, which is why we're here. But the point I'm trying to get at, I guess, is like, over time, people inevitably become more kind of closed in, and I think that's definitely happened with me. But I do feel like I had a large enough group of people who I really liked freshman year, who have all, I think like 100% of them have stayed my friends.
Damn.
Close to senior year.
You got retention.
Yeah, well, I would say it's not a high number, but it's like a very like close number of people.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What do you credit that to? How have you maintained those connections?
I think, well, partially luck, because my two probably closest friends are every year they've been roommates, and every year we've also been, our dorms have been pretty close, so physically close, so I've gotten to like go and see them at the end of the day after I go to the PRL for a couple hours. Or
The PRL is like the product realization lab. It's our
yeah.
like maker space.
Yeah,
Crazy.
I spend a lot of time in the PRL because I my master's in mechanical engineering, so I spend a lot of time in the PRL. But yeah, I just made it a routine to stop by them pretty much every day and say hi or check in or complain about my classes or whatever. And also I've got a car, which is I think good because it lets me plan cool trips that I can invite people on, which I think brings me closer, because through the trips I can get introduced to their friends who they've invited.
Yeah.
And I try to kind of like rotate the people I travel with every time, so that one day I'm going to Yosemite with, one person I know and three people I don't, and then by the end of it I know all four people. So
yeah, that touches on something that I want to talk about with you a lot, which is the notion of networking here, I guess, and the way that your relationship changes with the way your relationships change over time. I actually think like the conceptualizing of networking was probably the worst thing that I did for myself in terms of building relationships with people, like my whole time here, because it really made it abstract and goal oriented, and I was like, this is at odds with the way that I've met people for my whole life. So probably by the end of freshman year, I was like, I can't do this networking thing. Like I want to actually hear who you are and what your values are and like where your soul's at. And I don't know, I guess like for me that was partially motivated by finding out that a lot of people like were content to portray something totally different than what they actually were, for the sake of that networking, for the sake of like, look at how adaptable I am. Do you feel like do you think you've strayed from your truth at all in some cases, or do you feel like you've stayed pretty close to who you are?
That's a good question. I think inevitably, as you try to apply for some job and you want to kind of optimize for that job and say, tell a story about how much you love XYZ because you want a job in XYZ, and then you do the internship and you figure out, oh, well, it's actually not really what I wanted. I think it's happened to me a couple times, and so there's definitely times where my brain is kind of strayed, and that I'll tell myself like, oh, this is what I want, this is the job that I want. And then you'll try it out, or you'll try out a club, or try out really anything, and then realize that you were probably maybe a bit more dishonest with yourself than you realized when you were actually thinking about it the first time. And so, yes, I do feel like I've strayed from who I am, but I only ever realized that in hindsight. It's never an active thing of like, oh, I have to say I'm this way to you and this way to someone else.
So it doesn't feel like a state of change where you're like changing over time. Because I think that's something that I noticed about a lot of people here, and it's something that I consciously took a stand against. Is I was like, I'm not going to get more cynical and more utilitarian.
It's I maybe we have different definitions of cynicism, but I feel like I am maybe cynical about the Stanford startup culture sometimes in terms of, because that really I think is a big networking thing.
Yeah.
But my roommate this year, Miles, he's got a really cool startup. You should interview him sometime, actually.
I do have to interview him.
Yeah,
I
cool.
just failed his class.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But yeah, I should at some point.
he totally isn't cynical about it at all. Like he goes to all the networking events, goes to all the dinners that VCs have and everything, and that stuff always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and I never really. I made assumptions, I think, about the people who are going to them, and sure, I think the intentions are obviously pretty utilitarian of the people going and the VCs, but I think to a certain extent, like, you just kind of have to let go of that cynicism sometimes and say, oh, well, like, it's a free dinner and you'll get to meet people who, aren't necessarily this kind of stereotype,
right?
Because everyone at the dinner kind of realizes it's a little bit silly.
Yeah.
But you just do it anyway, and I think Miles has maybe opened my eyes a little bit to networking that I should have done more of.
Yeah.
While I was here.
Yeah, totally. That's fair. I guess the flip on that question is that I think a lot about like higher education as, for better or for worse, like feeding into our systems directly, becoming institutions. Like every good and bad institution depends on places like this to pump it full of people who will give up some of their values for it. And so I think like sometimes it's easy for me to look at that kind of like networking landscape or the utilitarian interaction landscape and get kind of bleak about the future of human interaction, especially since so much of the time it's conditioned either through these like really formal, polite, proper channels of like, I'm meeting you at an event and we are going to figure out what we can do to work together, versus like, I'm encountering you at random on the internet and it's going to be like really acidic and like, we're going to destroy each other. I wonder if there's kind of a dichotomy being made that's, I guess, too much toward immediately putting people in one bucket or another, where it's like, I have something I can do with you, or I have nothing I can do with you. Do you have any concern about that, or do you see that as a broader problem than here, or do you think it's like?
Yes, but I think about the whole kind of bucketing in maybe a different framework, which is just. I mean, I should have data to back this up, but this is just me talking off the cuff. I think that with the rise of social media and the rise of more of our lives being lived online, I think people are less patient with each other and more likely to just kind of, like, everything is almost aesthetic. Like, you're a gamer girl, or you're a, whatever boy, like all these kind of like, archetypes.
It sounds hilarious for some reason, but yeah.
And I think I do see people. Well, I don't know if I see people, because I think it's biased by the fact that I maybe predicted they're going to do this in the first place, so I can't really say if I see it. But I think that people might just leap to conclusions too quickly about other people and not really give them the grace that we might have in eras past to make mistakes or say something dumb. I think that sometimes someone says something dumb or makes a mistake, and suddenly that becomes the thing that defines them, because it's the only thing that you know. And rather than get to know that person more, or understand them, or empathize and think about a time that you did something stupid or you said something wrong, you just kind of go with that assumption and push with it. And I think that working in a corporate world, which I did for an internship, I wouldn't say I have like a long experience working in the corporate world, because
Summer's enough.
Summer. But I felt like sometimes there was a phrase that got thrown around at the job I was working at, which is be cognizant of the phrase that's written on your back, which is like, this assumption. It's based on this assumption that people are just gonna kind of distill you down to like, this is the numbers guy, or this is the person who's really good at public speaking, or this is the person who is late to work, or this is the person who complains, or that's kind of the phrase on your back.
Because it's easy.
Because it's easy to think that way
So
about
easy
people.
to deal with a social situation that way. Yeah.
And so it was HR who was saying that we should kind of that we should, and their thesis was that we should, that's why we should wear the company dress code, and we should show up to work on time and show up to meetings, because you don't want the phrase on your back to be this person's a snob, or this person is arrogant, or whatever. And I felt like that was such a, I think it's probably true to people think that way, but I think that we should strive to kind of like push beyond that a little bit. And I thought it was weird that HR was seemingly endorsing that as a way of viewing your coworkers, as a way to get them to do something as kind of stupid as follow the dress code.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's what I mean when I say concern. Like, these norms aren't just like naturally arrived at; they're institutionally enforced, and you know, we're expected to adhere to this in order to be a better worker. Like, you know, more easily integrate.
Yeah, because that's all people are gonna. I mean, anyone above you is just gonna think, okay, this is Cooper. He can do X, Y, Z, and this person can do X, Y, Z. Okay, they're gonna. Which, I mean, to a certain extent, like, you kind of have to do that because the company is almost like a machine where you have to think about all the functions of the parts. But I think it doesn't feel so good to be in the position of someone who's beneath, you know?
Yeah, and you know, people have to serve that that role under this framework. But I guess my next question on that would be, do you see a way to combat that, or do you think it is important that we combat that, or do you think it's ultimately a helpful thing that our, because I guess, like, I've been thinking a lot lately about how who you actually are lies somewhere between who you think you are and what others think you are.
Okay.
And you know, you probably don't have full truth on it. You're probably closer to truth than others are.
Probably.
But there's also all kinds of truths that others can perceive about you instantly. That you might never arrive at on your own. And there are personality types that get so bad with that, like narcissism. So I think
people who have no idea. It goes over their head who they truly are because they're so lost in who they think they are.
Yeah. So do you think there's a way to sort of overcome utilitarianism and arrive at a greater like self-awareness? Do you think there's a healthier mental framework for this so that we can have better relationships with ourselves and with our coworkers? Or do you think this is the enforced norm and like things will go this way? Easy question, I know.
Well, yeah, no, not an easy question. Like, I think and no need to fill the silence because I am thinking.
No, I'm waiting.
I think that we can kind of shake our fist at the sky at how the world is changing and how we interact differently and have different values, and you know, like, I mean, I don't want to be so patronizing as to say that that's the perspective of someone who's living in the past, because I think there's certainly a value in like I mean, I think we should be more empathetic and we should be like all the stuff I'm saying, but I think that there's at a certain point where you have to realize that you can't put the cat back in the bag, and instead of being mad at how our values have changed or how kind of things have changed, just try to adapt, keep as much as possible of your own values, even if a future generation won't have it, and just have confidence that, you know, even if something seems crazy and bad to you, it might not seem that way to someone else. Like, I think, for example, if the Puritans saw the way we lived and how many people don't go to church and how we are not, you know, we expose our bodies every day and we're revealing clothes and all this stuff, they would think that we live in, that would be like the worst outcome for them. You know what I mean? That they'd be like, this is horrible. What's the point of
this? Is hedonia.
Yeah, exactly. But we don't feel that way, and we don't feel like that it takes away meaning from our lives. And so, although, I'm kind of, it's sad to sometimes see things change in ways that you don't want them to change. I think that you have to have optimistic that people in the future won't be sad
Mhm.
about it, and instead will live their lives according to the new norm and find meaning in that.
Yeah.
And maybe that means we're going to replace more human interaction with more AIs that will make us feel better about ourselves, and that's the way that we'll find pleasure in the world. And that seems so unfulfilling and dumb, maybe
Yeah.
to you and me, because that's not the life that we live now. But at the end of the day,
God, envision it.
it's kind of inevitable. And so
Yeah.
I don't mean, I actually don't feel, that sounds like kind of a cynical way of thinking about it, but I don't feel cynical about it at all. I think it's actually a pretty optimistic way of viewing the world.
Yeah.
In that not every problem is a problem needing to be solved.
Totally, super rational. So I guess like that's a pretty perfect segue, because usually what I end with, and the core of like what I'm talking with people about on these episodes is, what does it mean to you to go into this world that's fraught with different values and fraught with enforced values, and actually retain your sense of identity and perpetuate the things that you want to see in this world? Like if you want to see more empathy, like what does it mean to you to create that? Or if you want to see like less utilitarianism, like how do you think we can go about creating that? How do you conceptualize your role?
I think what anyone could do, and I think what I don't want to say, oh, I'm doing this and other people aren't, because that's not necessarily true.
It's a subjective question.
I think that resist, compromising your values, resist doing things that make you uncomfortable or make you feel like are silly with no obvious upside, like if it's just to kind of enforce some dress code or some kind of silly thing.
Sure.
Like I think those are the kind of rules that you can practice breaking a little bit, so that when it actually comes time for things that matter, then you're not so paralyzed thinking, oh, that would be so out of the norm for me to break that rule, because I've never made people unhappy. I think that's probably the mistake that I've made too much of in my life, is making people a little bit too happy with my decisions or really anything I do. And so I'm trying now, maybe too late, because most people are going to do it in their like teenage rebellious years, but I'm trying to be less of a people pleaser and trying to kind of figure things out for myself a little bit more than I think I expected myself to going into college, kind of coming out of high school.
Yeah, it's super interesting to hear that side on it, because I feel like a lot of times people associate like service or like creating social good as something that has to be selfless, like something that it is about abstracting yourself out of the equation. When in reality, like we should be working on things that we're passionate about, and impact does come from within first, and then we get together and actually get shit done together. So that's a really interesting perspective on it, and I actually feel like that's a great note to end on. That's the core of what I wanted to cut out with this episode.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, totally. This has been awesome. But I guess that's our little episode on, God, I don't know, everything from networking to the collapse of the social order.
Yeah.
Finn.
Sweet. That was fun.